All right, thanks everybody. I am going to talk about being a good corporate citizen in Kubernetes. I have been in the technology industry for well over 20 years, working mostly on open source projects at companies like Puppet, Intel, and now at VMware, I'm working on our open source community strategy. I'm a board member of Open UK. I'm co-chair of the CNCF Contributor Strategy Technical Advisory Group. I'm a governing board member and maintainer for the Linux Foundation's Chaos Metrics project, and I'm an on and off contributor to Kubernetes. Your contributions to Kubernetes are centered around you as an individual. Contributions come from individuals, not companies. And as individuals, there's plenty of opportunities within the community to move into leadership positions. And the starting point is here at the bottom as an org member. And after you've made a few contributions, become an org member after you've made a few contributions, and this allows people to assign you to issues, things like that. And then after you have a history of making really solid contributions, maybe you get to be a reviewer and eventually an approver. But most of the work within Kubernetes, and I'll talk more about this later, this work happens across the many special interest groups and working groups. And each of these can have multiple sub-projects, which each have leads assigned. And at the very top are some committees, like the Kubernetes Steering Committee, which is an elected body to oversee the whole project. So this is kind of how the governance works. But to make this even more interesting for employers is that the leadership positions in Kubernetes stay with the individual, like in most open source projects. It stays with them if they move to a new company. And let's face it, Kubernetes skills are in super high demand, so you see quite a lot of movement between employers. And since an employee can take their leadership position in Kubernetes right with them to their next employer, companies are well served to make sure that these contributors are happy. In the Kubernetes project, companies participate by dedicating time from these individual employees who contribute on behalf of the company. I work at VMware. We have loads of people contributing to Kubernetes and other CNCF projects. Similarly, companies like Red Hat and Google and Microsoft and Intel and loads of others also employ people to work in Kubernetes as part of their day job. Now, if you don't already have employees with the skills to contribute to Kubernetes, you might be able to hire an existing contributor, or maybe even as a lead to do the work on your behalf. And in addition to devoting time from your company, CNCF also relies on funding from member companies for infrastructure, events, loads of other things. And I'll talk more about all of this later. Now, the Kubernetes community is made up of a wide variety of individuals who are all working together to make Kubernetes awesome. And the needs of the community come first, before the company or the individual needs. And this is really important. And when I talk about community, I'm including all of the people who work on the project. Some of these people contribute as part of their day job on behalf of an employer. Others contribute in their free time, and they're all important parts of the community. Now, this individual, employer, and community triad creates unique challenges for our people and for companies. As an individual contributing to Kubernetes, or any other open source project, there will be times when you need to find ways to create balance between what your employer wants you to do and doing the right thing for the community. In open source communities, you cannot force the community to do something. So during these conflicts, you need to err on the side of doing the right thing for the Kubernetes community, which can create really awkward and uncomfortable conversations with your manager and your company. Now, the worst case scenario is when there are direct conflicts between what your employer wants you to do, which would go against the best interest of the Kubernetes project and the community. And at times like these, you need to be diplomatic. It can help to ask some questions to understand what your company really needs to accomplish, to see if there's maybe another creative way to meet that need in a way that aligns with the needs of the community. And sometimes this won't be possible. And you'll need to go back to your company to explain why what they want just is not going to happen, which is one of those really awkward and uncomfortable conversations. As an employer, you can make this easier on your contributors by taking the time to understand the types of Kubernetes contributions that are likely to be welcomed by the community. It's important to have regular conversations with your contributors to understand what the project needs and learn how you can work within the community. You can help your employees be successful by being careful not to push your employees to do things that aren't in the best interest of the community. Personally, I have been in situations where I've left companies because of this conflict. And I know lots of other really amazing people who've done the same thing. So Kubernetes contributors are, as I mentioned, in high demand. So helping your employees avoid these conflicts in the first place will help you retain talent as a company. All right, now that we've talked about how collaboration works, let's talk a little bit about strategies and plans for Kubernetes. So before the VMware acquisition of Pivotal, I was responsible for creating our Kubernetes contribution strategy. One key to having a successful strategy for your open source contributions is really to align them with the overall business goals for your entire company. If your open source contributions don't support the overall strategies for your organization, you are really going to reduce the chance of being successful. By taking some time and effort to make sure that you support the overall corporate strategy, then it's going to be much easier to justify continuing these efforts during the next planning cycle for your organization. And this is why I started looking at Pivotal's corporate, like the top-level corporate strategies, and then also our product strategies. Because when writing the Kubernetes contribution strategies, I needed to make sure that I could show how our work on Kubernetes supported the overall goals of the company. And this can really help you make the case to senior management and company executives who aren't involved at all in the low-level details. Explaining how Kubernetes contributions support the overall goals of the company can help the exec team actually understand the importance of that work. Now, on the other hand, when your goals are not aligned with your corporate strategy, people will look at your participation in Kubernetes or other open source communities as something that they can just cut or starve of resources until it goes away on its own. But with open source projects, it's also easy to fall into the trap of describing your contributions as something that can sound an awful lot like charity to an executive. There's a strong open source ethos of contributing to the common good of the project, or what people often refer to as chop wood and carry water. And these are really, really important. We all need to pitch in and help in a variety of areas. But even many of these tasks can be described in ways to help your executives see why these tasks are important. The other thing you can do is encourage employees to work on these activities while they're blocked on other tasks, like waiting for a pull request review, for example. Now, as I mentioned earlier, most of the work in Kubernetes happens within the dozens of SIGs, working groups, committees. And as you can see, there are a lot of them. It can be overwhelming at first, and you aren't going to be able to have employees contribute to all of these areas. So you want to focus on just those few areas that are most important for you based on what you're trying to achieve. Determining where you need to contribute within these areas is likely to be a focus for your contribution strategy. Now at Pivotal, I spent a load of time just talking to product managers and engineering leaderships to better understand both our current pain points along with our future product strategies so that I could better understand both our short-term and long-term needs for various parts of the Kubernetes project and Kubernetes technologies. For example, we had customers asking for Windows support at the time, and we already had people contributing to the Windows special interest group. So that was included in the strategy as something that we needed to continue to do to support our current needs. We also at the time had some efforts underway to start shifting our applications to run on top of Kubernetes so that over the long term, we could run everything on top of Kubernetes. And then to support this longer term strategy, we had some people working within SIG API machinery, since most of our product teams would need to use those APIs to build on top of Kubernetes. And these are just examples of where we decided to focus. There were certainly other areas. But ultimately, you need to figure out the best places for your employees to contribute. And if you aren't sure where to start, contributor experience, docs, and release are all great SIGs that are both friendly to newcomers And they provide more insight into the overall project as you learn how Kubernetes works. Since companies contribute to Kubernetes by having employees participate and collaborate, you need to figure out how many people you need and what skills are required for those people. And in some cases, you might actually have employees with the skills you need. But this goes beyond just knowing the right technologies or having certain specialized skills. Contributing to an open source project like Kubernetes requires different skills than participating in internal projects. These people need to be comfortable in really ambiguous environments where they're going to receive feedback, possibly difficult, negative, unpleasant feedback, and they're going to be expected to respond in the public in a professional manner. And not every engineer wants to work in the public spotlight, which honestly can feel a little like being under a microscope sometimes. And if you don't have the skills internally, you might be able to find existing contributors you can hire. All right, now that we've talked about what you want to do, let's talk about how to do it while being a good corporate citizen and avoid some common but embarrassing mistakes. The first step is to join a SIG or a working group. Now, each SIG or working group is really a little bit different, but usually this means joining one or more mailing lists, some Slack channels. It is really a good idea to join the main mailing list for your SIG or working group to get project meeting invites, other important information. It usually also gives you access to certain documentation. And then you should also join relevant sub-project mailing lists or Slack channels. If your time zone permits, there are meetings, which are a great way to learn about the current work. They're recorded, so you can watch them later if you can't attend. And the monthly community meetings, another good meeting if you're just starting out. Spend whatever time it takes to fully understand the contribution guidelines, the code of conduct, and other expectations for collaboration within Kubernetes as a whole. But also note that a lot of the SIGs and working groups actually have their own contribution guidelines that cover things that are specific to that area. So you want to have a look at those as well. And I recommend taking some time to lurk in that SIG or working group and understand how people participate. By taking the time to observe and lurk for a bit, you can learn about how people behave and get a feel for how people typically respond. And when you've spent some time understanding the expectations and how to contribute, start with something small, like some bug fixes to learn about the contribution process. A good place to start is with the things that are tagged as good first issue. And then after you've done a couple of those, maybe you can move on to something that you find interesting or look for help wanted issues, which are usually require a little bit more experience than good first issues. Now, after you get past those first few small contributions, you want to make sure that you spend the time discussing proposed changes within that SIG or working group before you start trying to make them. These discussions might happen in meetings, GitHub issues, and by talking about these very early in the process, you can make sure that they'll be consistent with the expectations of the project. You can also learn about anyone else who might be working in similar areas to avoid conflicting changes and avoid surprising people, especially for maybe new features or other really big changes. It's also important to keep in mind that you do not have any control over other participants in the project. This is different from working within a company where you can escalate issues to managers who can help you resolve problems with, say, non-responsive employees. In Kubernetes and other open source projects, you don't have a strict chain of command or other ways to exert control over the people you collaborate with. Instead, you should strive to be kind and easy to work with, since you'll need to find ways to influence people to respond to your issues or your pull requests. Community members, and especially leadership within the Kubernetes community, really should expect to spend some time helping to bring up the next wave of new contributors. And as employers, we should plan to have our contributors put some time and effort into this. This could mean having employees who are experienced Kubernetes contributors, maybe mentor some junior employees and help them get started in the community. Or it could mean participating in the many mentoring programs that are available. We also have shadow programs where a new person can shadow an experienced contributor in a specific role. And this was first adopted within the release team, where they have the release as a leader for every role in the release team. And Each of those leaders has a couple of shadows. And when the new team's formed for the next release, the leadership roles are often selected from the previous shadows. And this has been expanding into other areas of the project. So you'll find shadow programs in other areas as well. And whenever you can, you should find opportunities to sponsor new contributors. And this term's a little confusing since people tend to think of financial sponsorship, but in this case, it means using your position in the project to advocate for someone who might not have the same opportunities as you do. This can be as simple as recommending someone to help out with something, sponsoring someone for org membership, or recommending someone as a new reviewer or approver. And this is especially important for underrepresented folks that might be overlooked or who might not be as forthcoming about asking for a leadership role. A lot of the work that we do in Kubernetes and other open source projects is based on the relationships that we have with other people. If your employees are contributing to Kubernetes, you should encourage them to attend Kubernetes events. By having some key employees attend those conferences, they can build deeper, lasting relationships with others that benefit your company and your employees. I've spent an embarrassing amount of time at open source conferences over the years, and I have really deep and lasting connections with these people that I hang out with at these events. And now when I need to do something new, or maybe I have a question, I usually know someone who can point me in the right direction. And I often make introductions to those people for other employees so that they can learn something new. I'm going to wrap up my talk with a discussion about the Kubernetes community values, because the values do a really good job of summing up my advice for being a good corporate citizen within Kubernetes. In Kubernetes, distribution is better than centralization. With a project as massive as Kubernetes, that scale is only viable through high trust and high visibility distribution of work. So authority, decision-making, technical design, code ownership, and documentation is delegated to the various SIGs, working groups, and committees. And this is why I recommend focusing on particular SIGs and working groups when you build your strategies, and have each employee focus their energy on at most maybe a couple of areas. Inclusive is better than exclusive within the Kubernetes community. Successful technology requires different perspectives and different skills, which are easier to achieve in a welcoming and respectful environment. Community membership in Kubernetes is a privilege, not a right, and leadership is earned through contributions. We show respect for the time and effort that people put into a contribution, regardless of whether the contributor is brand new or maybe a community veteran. And your employees need to be prepared to engage with people in a way that is helpful and kind, while showing appreciation for the hard work of those other contributors. In Kubernetes, evolution is better than stagnation. This not only refers to technological evolution, but also includes continual improvement, servant leadership, mentorship. It's the duty for leaders in the Kubernetes community to find, sponsor, and promote new community members. Your experienced employee contributors should expect to spend some time mentoring or sponsoring newer contributors. Kubernetes values community over product or company. So it's important for your employees to think about the needs of the community first, for the benefit of all of its members or leaders everywhere. Individuals gain status through their work in the community, and companies gain status through their commitments to support this work by providing the contributors that are required for the project to operate. This goes back to when I was talking about the balance between individuals, companies, and communities. As an employer, it's in your best interest to make it easy for your employees to prioritize the needs of the community and not try to just push your own agenda when it's not in the best interest of the Kubernetes community. With that, thank you very much.